也有的脚酸，所以今天我们来看一个东西，就是 Brode 讲他是怎么设计 Marvel Snap 的。那这其实还蛮重要的啦。那大家可以看一下这些游戏设计幕后事情呢，可以更加知道为什么你会觉得这个游戏圈圈叉叉就是好玩，或是怎么样，或是觉得这边我的感觉蛮不一样之类的。然后我们就看下去吧。我也还没有看。
My name is Ben Brode.
他是 Ben Bro，
I got a clicker. Okay, here we go.
所以你们可以听到 Ben Bro 声音有点沙哑，因为他喉咙那时候好像不大 OK，
Let me make sure my clicker works.
OK，
There we go. Okay.
我们
I'm the Chief
用
Development Officer at Second Dinner.
1.5倍速看。
Over the last 5 years, we made Marvel Snap. Before that, I spent the last 15 years at Blizzard doing QA and other things for Warcraft 3, World of Warcraft, Diablo 2, and some other stuff. But I spent most of my time there on Hearthstone.
对，你可以看到 Ben Bro 其实他在暴雪待了15年，然后做很多韩式，然后最后就是做出了炉石，然后当然他现在做的是这个
I
Marvel
was
Snap。
the first game designer and eventually the game director on that game. I also have a successful rap career on YouTube, but I'm mostly known for having a weird laugh. It's holding up better than I thought. So far, so good. Okay. Okay. So this talk is about how we designed Marvel Snap. It took us a little over 4
怎么设计 Marvel Snap？他们花了大概4年再多一
years.
点。
Over the next hour, I'm going to talk about everything we tried, the stuff that worked, the stuff that didn't work, and everything I learned from that process. Mostly about the core gameplay of Marvel Snap. And I wasn't going to show you an outline, but instead I'm just going to show you every slide in the presentation. That's it. That's the whole presentation.
这是他这个 PowerPoint 的每一页
As you can see, there's no
之类
Kit Kat
的。
images, so keep your expectations low, please. Marvel Snap is a mobile-first, super-fast digital collectible card game where players compete to win 2 out of 3 locations by playing cards to locations and trying to add up all their power from their cards to get the highest total power on their side. We did some crazy stuff like make all of our cards in
对，他基本上在介绍 Marvel Snap 什么东西，那各位应该都已经知道，所以就不赘述了。
in 3D. But one of the biggest things that we did is add this cool betting and bluffing mechanic with the cube where you could snap on it to double the stakes of the game. How many of y'all have tried Marvel Snap? Wow, okay, I'll buy you a copy, sir.
有
Okay, so step
有
one,
人没有举
inspiration.
手。
Designers are like chefs. For the most part, we don't invent new ingredients. We take ingredients that already exist and combine them in new and exciting ways. For example, you might give 2 different chefs flour, water, tomato, basil, and cheese.
这边是说游戏设计，或者说游戏设计师就像厨师一样，他们是把不同的这个材料放在一起，然后做出一个游戏出来。所以我们不会自己去研发新材料，虽然有时候会有新材料出现之
And
类
one of
的
them。might make pizza. The other one might make pasta. But the pasta chef wouldn't go to the pizza chef and say, Ray, I invented flour. Right, that's my thing. You took flour from me. It's not about inventing new ingredients. It's
所以他们不会说就是我发明了面粉，所以你的披萨不可以用面粉之类。所以有些不同的游戏其实也会有一些同样元素，就是它
about
想
how we mix
阐述的意思。
And sometimes people find really exciting ways to mix old ingredients, like this fellow online I found who has a recipe for basil tomato cheesecake.
Oh my god， 那什么 cursed？
So as fans of games, we gather ingredients naturally as we play games. But I want to talk about how I approach ingredient gathering differently as I start a new project. So I'm going to talk about how we did this for Marvel Snap. But one of the things we tried on Snap, some of the things we tried on Snap were either the result of lessons I learned on my time on Hearthstone that worked really well for us, or the result of some hard lessons I learned while on Hearthstone I want to do a little differently for Snap. So I'm going to tell a few Hearthstone stories along the way here, starting with my first visit to the supermarket 15 years ago.
所以他这边要讲一下他那时候设计炉石他遭遇了什么事情，然后就学到什么事情，所以他在设计 Marvel Snap 的时候就会避免这些事情之类的。
So 15 years ago is when we started working on Hearthstone, and this is before the App Store existed, before the iPad was announced. In 2008, when people talked about mobile games, we were talking about Game Boy games.
所以这是15年前的事情，也就是2008。那时候就是没有手机 App Store， 也没有 iPad 这种东西，所以那时候只有什么 Game Boy 之类的东西。现在小朋友或许也不知道是什么东西，不过总而言之就是那时候的市场跟现在市场其实是非常不一样的。
So the first thing I did when I joined the Hearthstone team was play literally every game in the digital collectible card game genre. And I learned a ton from playing these games. Sometimes I found a new ingredient I was excited to try. Sometimes I just found out I didn't like onions or something. But that's still really valuable. For example, I didn't know that I wouldn't enjoy a grid-based card combat system in a collectible card game until I played all these games. And it's way cheaper to learn that lesson by playing someone else's games than that.
所以他那时候玩了市面上所有的有可以点击式的，就是会点来点去的这个卡牌游戏，所以想办法用这种方法来学习到底其他的人做什么事情。然后像他这边就说他其实不喜欢 grid base 的游戏。那所谓的 grid base 就是 方格一格一格的那种游戏，所以就比如说有很多卡牌游戏会把一个东西放一个格子上，然后那个格子可能会有一些特殊意义，所以你要移来移去之类的。简单来说，就可能有点像龙门骰那类的东西。
Prototype yourself and learn it that way. But despite having been a fair number of digital collectible card games in 2008, most of the inspirations for Hearthstone came from physical games. So here's the recipe for Hearthstone's core gameplay.
所以他说，炉石的这个主要的元素其实是来自于下面这些东西，而且其实主要不是从数位游戏，而是从实体游戏来的。
We took a lot of ingredients from the World of Warcraft trading card game, like the card types, direct attacking, sticky damage, the win condition. A really important ingredient from Battle Spirits, which is being re-released soon, which is the mana system, and then we came up with a few important innovations like hero powers, no responses, weapon durability, fatigue mechanic, and general low complexity. So I asked.
所以这就是他们3个不同的东西，一个是原先 World of Warcraft 就是 WoW， 也就是魔兽世界，原先自己就有一个 TCG 的游戏。那这个游戏其实是由Brian Kibler 做出来的东东。那如果你们不知道他是谁的话，其实那个家伙原先是一个 MTG 的人，然后最后他做这个东西，然后这个东西一部分东西又变成炉石之类，又被 Ben Bro 融合这2个其他东西，
Mike Elliott, who is the designer on Battle Spirits, how he comes up with new ideas for games. Because he's designed like hundreds of board and card games. And I have not designed hundreds of games. So I was like, how do you do it? How do you go? And he told me he gets all of his game ideas from games conventions. He just walks the show floor where everyone's showing off all their new stuff that they've been working on. And he just lets ideas come to him. He just soaks them up. And when he leaves the convention, he's got like 12 new ideas for games.
他说他有另外一个人，就是设计了非常非常多的这种游戏，然后他是从游戏的这种聚会，然后他就去逛一圈，然后就会有很多游戏的点子之类
This is
的。
a supermarket. It's full of ingredients.
这就是游戏对这个游戏厨师来说，就像是超市一样，有非常多的不同的素材。
Gen Con, where I went in 2008 or 9, and this is where I discovered Battle Spirits, which ended up becoming a big inspiration for Hearthstone. So I used Mike's technique to find and become inspired by his game, which I thought was kind of cool. So I worked on Hearthstone for about 6 years before it shipped, but I missed the launch party for Hearthstone because my son was born that day. And we hadn't launched on mobile yet, but I got a special build of the game on my phone, and I spent a lot of time playing Hearthstone on my phone while I was holding my son in the other hand. And being a dad really changed the way that I could play games. I couldn't just sit in front of my computer for 4 hours raiding. I had to get my games in while at the park or on the bathroom. So Clash Royale came out a couple years later, and I was super jealous of Clash Royale because you.
所以他这边就讲说他这叫什么？他游戏也就炉石上线的那天，刚刚好那个他的小孩就出生了，所以他就变成说必须要单手来玩炉石。有单手玩过炉石的人就知道呢，其实有点困难。然后之后炉石过了几年之后，其实 Clash Royale 也就是皇室战争就这个游戏就出现了。不过当然那时候也有手机啊那些什么东西了，所以那时候皇室战争出现之后，他就对皇室战争这款游戏感到非常的嫉妒。
If you have 5 minutes, you are 100% sure you can get a game of Clash Royale in. And I thought that was just brilliant. And then 5 years ago.
所以 Clash Royale 就是你有5分钟的话，你一定可以玩完一场。Clash Royale 就皇室战争的游戏。
Hamilton and I, Hamilton's the EP, was the EP on Hearthstone, he's the CEO of Second Dinner, set out to build a new company, try something new. And we didn't know that we were going to make a collectible card game. But once we decided to do that, I once again.
所以2018年的时候，他其实就离开暴雪，然后开始做自己的公司还有游戏。那这就是那这个公司 CEO。
Found myself playing every mobile digital collectible card game I could find. So here's all the games I was playing in 2018. And that game on the left, Card Monsters 3-minute duels.
所以这个就是天哪！所以这个就是他2018年玩的所有的游戏。话说那时候其实我有在 MTGA 上面遇到 Ben Bro。
It's really cool. Has anyone played that game? Oh my gosh, what up? I probably fought on the ladder. So it's great. It's a vertical, mobile, digital, collectible card game. And in some ways, it was the proof I was looking for that there was something really cool in the space.
所以他可能就从这个游戏里面找到了一些灵感。你可以看到，其实这游戏界面设计跟那个 Marvel Snap 其实有一点点像。
So, what was the recipe? My voice is better when I talk deep. What was the recipe for Marvel Snap? What ingredients did we gather? This is the mystery I'm setting up to pull you all through the rest of my presentation here. So we had a bunch of ingredients running around in our heads, and it was time to prototype. So this is what the first.
所谓的 prototyping 的意思就是说，想办法设计一个原型出来，一个游戏的原型。那一般来说，游戏设计在做 prototyping 的时候，都会蛮多人会用纸或是用数位的方式来先做一些就是可以游玩的卡牌或模型，然后大家就是试着玩玩看这个游戏的原型是不是好玩，游戏核心是不是好玩的。
First prototype for Marvel Snap looked like. I'm serious. Okay, so we were sitting around brainstorming game ideas, and Hamilton said, I've always wanted to play a turn-based strategy game with the backgammon doubling cube. And so I booted up Hearthstone, and every turn of the game, Hamilton said, would you double the cube right now? If your opponent doubled the cube, would you concede?
哦，所以这边他们的意思是说，他们想要做的事情，其实就是想要做这种 cube 双倍，就是你赌的筹码会直接加倍的这种事情。所以他就先玩炉石，然后来做这个，在脑袋里面或在旁边记录自己，你会不会想要按 snap 这种感觉？
And we got to immediately feel the impact of that mechanic without having to build anything. And through those initial playtests, we realized a couple things about this doubling mechanic. It increased the emotional range, right? Instead of just 1 star per match, you're playing for potentially a lot more stars. We spent less time losing, right? In a normal game, if you have like a 5% chance to win, you got to play that all the way out, right? Because you might win. And that period of time where you're like probably going to lose can be pretty grueling, like the final 6 hours of a game of Monopoly.
所以他这边的意思就是说，第一个就是你的这个情感 range 会变大，因为你从正1、负1变成正8到负8这种 range， 或者是正8到负4，假设你很厉害的话，或负2或负1。那另外一点就是你输的时间会比较少，也就是说，当你的游戏胜率已经开始降低的时候，已经只有5%的时候，那一般游戏你可能就会继续去把它玩完，因为你还是有5%机会会赢。可是因为你在这种 Marvel Snap 里面，假设对面已经 Snap 的话，那你其实就会直接撤退了，因为你知道你赢的几率真的不高，所以你应该要直接撤退，所以你就不会一直有那种快速的感觉。
But when you're incentivized to bail out because you're going to lose less cubes, you could just leave and you spend less time in that grueling zone. Games that you don't play all the way to completion are faster, obviously. But there was 2 other things that I think had a really big impact that I'm going to dig into a little bit more. So the first is zero sum is zero fun. If 2 players play a game and one of them wins and the other loses, and it is as fun to win as it is not fun to lose, you have created net zero joy.
所以他这边的一个算是一个蛮崭新的概念，就是说他会希望说玩家在玩这款游戏的时候，不要玩一个 zero sum 的 game。那 zero sum 其实是我忘记中文叫什么，反正就是一个双方加起来的这边它是用 joy units， 就是大家有多开心，就是你如果有30个 joy units 的话，就是你有30开心点的话，那你就超开心。当你获得30开心点的时候，假设你的这个30个开心点是从对面输的那方这个获得的话，那你其实等于说你这个玩家量是会在游戏循环里面有可能会越来越少的。所以你会需要制造一个游戏，就是你的开心点，就算你输的话，你也不会至少不会输掉30开心点，会输掉少一点开心点，或就算你输了，你也会开心之类的。
You just moved happiness from one person to another. So we were trying to avoid this situation. There's a bunch of ways to tackle this. The first is bots. It's one of the easiest ways to avoid zero sum because you just have a player who's winning and nobody's losing.
对，第一个方法就是打电脑，就是用机器人。难怪这个游戏这么多机器人。
So I really like PUBG Mobile. I played a lot of PUBG Mobile, and the first time I played it, I got first place. And the second time I played it, I got first place again out of 100 people. And I started thinking, I used to play Eliminate on iOS, and I played Metro.
所以他这个想法可能就从 PUBG 来的 ，PUBG Mobile 来的。
Prime Hunters on Nintendo DS. Maybe these skills are coming back to me after all these years. And so I posted this screenshot on Facebook, and I was like, guys, I just won my first 2 games of PUBG Mobile. I'm so good, which is a little annoying. And all my friends jumped on in the comments like, dude, you played 100% bots in those first 2 games. And I
对啊，就是说前2局的这个游戏有另外98个人全部都，或另外99个人全部都是机器人之类的。
So I deleted the post. But if they hadn't told me, I would have experienced all of the joy of victory without any of the agony of defeat. So instead, I just have to bask in the joy of having a rad-looking character avatar. So at GDC 2014, my mentor and the original game director of Hearthstone, Eric Dials, gave a talk about Hearthstone design values. He talked about little victories. The big victory is whether you win or lose the game. And the little victories are things that happen during the game, anything that makes you feel smart or powerful. So imagine.
所以这是一个荧幕里面有个荧幕，然后有个荧幕。那这边讲的是就是什么叫小胜利？小胜利就不是你整场的那种整场一局的胜利大胜或大败，而是在这之间的小胜利之类的东西。
And you come out of the spawn point and someone headshots you and you die. You had no moment where you felt smart or powerful during that game. But let's imagine you're playing a game of Counter-Strike and you run out and you're just blowing up everyone on the enemy team, and eventually you lose, but you still felt like awesome while you were doing it. That's little victories. So essentially, little victories add a little joy, even if you lose. So on Hearthstone, we avoided cards that blow up enemy mana crystals or force your opponent to discard cards because they could potentially create scenarios where you never get to feel powerful. In Marvel Snap, there's 6 turns. You always get to play 6 turns. You always get to do something. You get to play some of your cards and feel a little bit powerful while you do it.
所以他那边的意思就是说， 可以倒退吗？不行，就是他那边意思就是说，当那些小胜利，就是比如说，当你在玩游戏的时候，你有一阵子你会觉得你可以做一些很厉害的事情，然后做那些很厉害的事情，就会让你觉得你很棒，所以你就会感到开心。所以当你就算最后输了，你也不会感到那么难过，所以这样就不会是一个零总和的游戏吗？之类的。
But the cube had one of the biggest impacts on the zero-sum paradigm. So we found that when your opponent snaps and you retreat, it could feel like this. In some cases,
所以他说这个 snap，或者是说，就是当对面 snap，然后你直接跑走的话，你可能会觉得哈，我节省一个魔方，然后你就觉得很开心，而不会就是觉得说自己竞争输掉之类的。
it made losing feel like victory. It's a strategic retreat where you don't fall victim to your opponent's gambit. And we realized we can emphasize this with some presentation changes. So this is what the concede button used to look like. Here's what it looks like now.
所以他们把原先的撤退钮，或者说以前叫投降钮，变成撤退钮，所以你就知道你是这个技术性撤退，而不是真的投降给你对手之类的。
Here's what it used to look like when you retreated, and here's
所以他们把你输了变成你逃走了之类的。
what it looks like now. You didn't lose. You escaped. You're a genius.
你没有输，你逃走，你是个天才之类的。
So this presentation stuff works in reverse as well. When you lost a game, we used to have the announcer go, "You lose," and we got that because it's emphasizing exactly the emotions we're trying to minimize. So the effects on the zero-sum problem were encouraging, but the really game-changing effects of the cube was the depth. Excuse me, one thing. Oh yeah. So we often talk about poker as a game that has never required an expansion to remain strategically deep for decades, and it's because of the power of betting and bluffing mechanics. Hearthstone with a doubling cube is all of the depth of Hearthstone plus all of the depth of these betting and bluffing mechanics. We thought, hey, what if we could reduce the complexity of the genre and lean on the cube mechanic to make up for some of the depth that we lose by simplifying the genre?
所以基本上他这边的意思是说，他们把原先一个游戏的这个复杂度，就在还没有 cube mechanic，就是还没有这个赌魔方这个机制之前的游戏原型的游戏复杂度降低，然后变成把大部分游戏复杂度反而都仰赖到这个赌博魔方，这听起来好糟糕，就是 Snap 魔方的这个机制上面呢，或许这样就可以让游戏变得简单，但同时又还有一定的复杂度，因为你可以决定你什么时候要 Snap 之类的。
So with that insight, we set out to build the simplest card game we could that would allow for us to use a doubling cube. So I love games that are simple, have a lot of depth. A lot of people use these words complexity differently. So here's how I'm going to define them today. Complexity is the cost you pay before you can play the game. It's the learning you have to do.
所以这边他说就是complexity 就是游戏复杂度，然后 depth 就是游戏深度。所以他这边定义了两件不同事情，就是 complexity 是当你学会这个游戏，你需要花多久时间或多久精神来学会这个游戏，所以把这个定义为游戏复杂度。那深度是游戏有趣的部分。
Depth is the fun part. It's the interesting decisions. So here's a review we got on Metacritic when we launched Hearthstone. And this was a common criticism at the time when we first came out with the game. And I think it's because a lot of people misunderstand the relationship between complexity and depth. A lot of players want deep games, and it's true that you have to add complexity to add depth. So people see games with lots of complexity, and they assume it's got the depth that they're looking for in a game. But you can add complexity that doesn't add any depth. For example, if we had a rule that says every time you play a card in Marvel Snap, you have to yell the name of your card into the microphone or you lose, that's an important rule. You have to learn that rule, but it doesn't add any interesting depth to the game. On the other end, there's complexity that yields an outsized amount of depth. We often call mechanics that yield a lot of depth for a small amount of complexity elegant designs. For example, tic-tac-toe is a game that has very little complexity and also very low depth. Go has a little bit more complexity, has a humongous amount more depth. Monopoly has only a little bit more depth than tic-tac-toe, in my opinion, but a lot more depth. This top right box, I chose Magic the Gathering because it has a huge amount of depth, but also AI researchers called it the world's most complex game.
所以基本上它这边就是一个游戏复杂度对上游戏深度的图表。那所以这边有圈圈叉叉，就是低复杂度低深度，然后这是围棋高深度低复杂度。不过他这边把复杂度定义为就是你需要学习基本规则的地方。当然围棋你可能也要学很多莫名其妙的东西啊，不过他就把那个归类为深度。那这边是这个大富翁。大富翁你可能要学很久吗？其实我不大确定这个大富翁为什么在这边。不过总而言之就是，对，它大富翁其实也没有很复杂，然后也没有很有深度，我觉得。那这边上面这个就是魔法风云会，那就是 游戏虽然有很多复杂度，就你要学很久，有各式各样莫名其妙的机制，可是就是对。
So you can mitigate, adding more depth by slowly introducing new concepts over time, right? And if you get more depth by adding complexity, shouldn't you just keep adding more complexity to get more of that depth? I actually think there's a depth limit. If your game already takes a lifetime to master, what does adding more depth get you? More lifetimes?
所以他这边的另一个想法就是说，游戏其实未必是有越多深度越好，或者说越复杂越好之类的。这边是说深度啊，就是假设你游戏已经需要花一辈子来变成一个大师的话，这游戏其实就不需要任何更多的深度了之类的。就是你有更多的深度又如何之类的。
Only get one. So I think the goal is how do you reach the depth limit with the smallest amount of complexity? So if your game has this much depth, perhaps you should remove complexity and depth until you get there. I hope the little star is visible there. However, removing complexity can have a weird effect on your team. So in early Hearthstone, taunt was supposed to be a one-time effect. If
所以基本上就是他觉得游戏应该让深度变成一个到适当的深度，然后这样子大家就会让游戏的这个 enjoyment 变最大之类的。
if you attacked an enemy with taunt, it would lose taunt. And there was a bug one day where that stopped working, and it just kept taunt forever.
所以他这边说，原先嘲讽在游戏的炉石的嘲讽的效果是，现在是永远都会有这个嘲讽效果。那原先嘲讽效果是它只会嘲讽一次而已，就是你攻击一次，嘲讽效果就不见了。那有一天游戏出了个 bug， 就是说这个嘲讽的效果会永远持续住。
And we thought about it. We said, this is simpler if they just keep taunt forever. They just always have taunt.
对他觉得，那他们说哦，其实他如果永远嘲讽的话，其实比较简单，规则其实变简单。
So let's just not fix the bug. And a lot of members on the team came up to us and said, hey, the game just got a lot less deep. There's like all this really interesting combat decisions where you're trying to drop taunt in the correct order. And they're not wrong. It's less deep.
所以的确是没有嘲讽游戏的深度，其实就变浅了。
But the thing is, the team had already paid all of the complexity cost to learn how this works.
所以因为之前这个游戏团队已经花了学习这个要怎么规避这个嘲讽效果的东西，所以他们就觉得说，游戏怎么可以变浅呢？这个游戏越深越好啊之类的。
When you remove complexity, they only feel the resulting loss of depth. So I've been talking a lot about rules complexity, but you know what matters even more than rules complexity? Text complexity. This is the filter through which people will learn the rules of your game.
所以这边是文字的复杂
And
度
you。can make the game seem much simpler or much more complicated depending on how you explain it. And we've all felt this when we sit down to play a board game with our friends, and you're just baffled at the end of the explanation. You're like, let's just play one turn. So this talk by George Fan at the 2012 entitled "How I Got My Mom to Play Through Plants vs Zombies" is the best GDC talk of all time.
所以他这边说文字的复杂度其实也会大幅影响大家学习游戏的速度之类的。
It's fantastic, yeah. And this slide was mind-blowing to me. If you put more than 8 words on the screen, players will not read them. I think he's right. And so here is every tooltip in the first 15 minutes of Marvel Snap.
所以他是说，如果画面上有超过八个字的话，或者说8个英文字的话，其实大家根本就不会想把它读完之类的。所以你可以看到这边一开始游戏的地方，就是他们其实都选了小于8个字的东西，没有错。这个英文版的应该游戏体验应该显著好很多，因为你可以看到英文版的他们其实很照顾大家这些东西。1、2、3、4、5、6、7，我操！
Snap. And here are the word counts for each tooltip. And I'm very excited about this. There's some flavor dialogue that comes up that is more than 8 words every once in a while. But I don't care if you don't read that stuff because it's just flavor. This is the important stuff that you need to learn.
最重要的东西他都尽量让它
card text. So we realized that on Hearthstone, for a digital game, we didn't need to write out as much of the edge case stuff. So your hero deals 2 fire damage to target hero or ally became deal 2 damage. The average word count for Hearthstone was 9 words.
所以他这边你可以看到，他把原先这张牌，这其实应该是一张那个原先魔兽世界交换卡牌的牌，就是你的英雄造成2点火焰伤害到目标英雄或友方，这张卡变成造成2点伤害，所以就你可以看到就节省非常非常多字。这其实也有点在就是算表吗？就是说为什么游戏王或者是一些其他的卡牌跟炉石的卡牌的差别这么大？
And for Snap, it's 11, partially because we don't use keywords.
所以像 Snap 的话有11个字， 就平均一张牌上面是11个字。不过当然中文就不好说。
So we've fallen short of the George fan idea, which makes me sad. But to make sure the text complexity stayed low, we would audition our cards with people. We would sit them down and show them the cards. And if you had to read a card more than one time, we said, raise your hand and let us know, because we don't want any card text to be confusing enough. You'd have to read it twice to understand it. So this was our goal: low complexity, high depth, and the doubling cube really helped us get there. It's easy to understand, adds a ton of depth. However, the simple mechanic of the doubling cube ended up taking a ton of iterations to get just right. So when we played it physically,
所以基本上他这边有说，就是这个 Snap 的这个机制，其实他们经过很多演绎之后，才达到现在这个完美的状态之类的。那原先一开始是完全没有任何设限的。
paper in a die, we had no limit. You could double the cube as many times as you want to. We knew we needed to have a little more structure when we moved into a digital prototype. So we said, okay, you can double once a turn, and we'll just throw up a dialog box that says, hey, your opponent wants to double the cube. Are you cool sticking around, or do you want to concede right now?
所以他这边就是说，原先是完全没有任何限制，然后到电子版的时候，就变成是一轮只能 snap 一次，然后他会 snap 之后，他会跳出来说，哦，你的对手 snap， 你要撤退还是你要继续之类
It
的
was。pretty jarring because interrupt, you just like have to stop playing your cards in the middle of your turn to process the dialog box. So I said, okay, what if we move it to the end of the turn? Right? You do all your actions, and then we'll tell you what your opponent wanted to do, and we'll compare to what you wanted to do, and we'll resolve it then. And that helped. We started to experiment with some stuff like, could we make the betting and bluffing have even more texture? So we added not just the ability to double the cube, but would you also like to mega double the cube? Which was nerdy. Double.
所以他这边增加了一个8倍的 mega double， 就是你原先是乘以2嘛，然后这边变乘以8之类的，反正就很憨。
And this is pretty cool because you could like get them to limp in with a double or like slam a huge bet with an 8x there. But there was a lot of dialogue boxes, and a bunch of the people on the team like didn't even understand like what are these numbers? Why do I care about all this? Like I just want to play the card game. You're getting
所以他这边的意思就是说，因为他把2个不同的机制混合在一起，那混合机制的时候，其实出现很多问题，就是因为你需要一直问说，你要不要你的这个魔方要变多了，还是要变少？你要1倍、2倍、8倍之类的东西。所以你看到有这边一大堆视窗一直跳出来，其实对一些卡牌玩家会觉得干你娘，我只是想玩牌而已之类的。所以他这边就觉得这边还是有太多的视窗的问题要处理了，那他们必须要简化。尽量来简化这个过程。
In the way of these dialogue boxes. So we had what I think was the biggest inspiration in this whole journey, which is what if we moved the double acceptance from an explicit, like yes I accept the double, to an implicit acceptance of the double. So we just had the cube automatically double every turn, and we said, hey, next turn the cube's going to increase.
Oh my
do you want to stick around? And if you do, just assume you've accepted the double.
所以这边变成是一个自动 double 的系统，就是他们就等于说。直接觉得说他好像每轮都会直接就是魔方会乘以2之类的，然后这到底在干嘛？32K 是什么鬼？就是每人都会自动乘以2，然后你如果说不逃跑的话，那就等于说你就等于是接受这样子。
And this was, we used the term arcadey after we made this change. It feels so much faster. We got rid of all the dialogue boxes. We loved it. But players missed the ability to hit a button to really project their confidence to their opponent. So,
所以可是这样子每轮自动 double 的问题就是它变成没有 bluff， 就是没有办法诈骗别人，没有办法唬别人。
We added the ability to tap on the cube to take it from doubling next turn to mega doubling to going up to 8.
所以它就直接是现在它这里变成是按魔方会变成从乘以2变成乘以8。
Next turn. And this caused another problem, which was if you're playing most of your games for hundreds of cubes, but on turn 1 you're only playing for 1 cube and your hand is just slightly less than average, you should bail out, right? Just like.
所以那样子的问题是，当这个前期回合，如果因为你这每轮都 double， 每人都乘以2的这个状况，如果到后面会等于说你每轮最后都会玩几百个魔方之类的，那等于说你一开始前面就要一直疯狂撤退，所以变成是就是他们接下来要。几乎变成我们现在这个样子。
So people were conceding on turn 1 most of the games. We realized we had to bring in the range so that the average cube game and the starting cube game were much closer in scale. So we got rid of all the auto doubling and just let people snap a couple times. Hopefully that would bring it down.
所以
People missed having the opportunity to bail out before the game ended. They really liked feeling like an excuse to leave. So we combined all of our approaches up to now. We added 1 auto double at the end of the game, so you could bail out on turn 5 if you want.
所以他们变成是有3次的 snap 的机会，然后变成是最后一轮会自动乘以2。然后每个人各1次 snap， 所以等于说总共3次 snap。所以你可以看到这边游戏机制的这个演进史是什么样子，其实真的是蛮曲折离奇的。
you want to. You had one snap where you could tap on the cube to double it. Eventually, we added the snap back, and that's where we ended up. That's how we got there. It was quite the journey. But why did we call tapping on the cube a snap? And for that matter, why is the game called Marvel Snap? It's because naming is impossible. This is one of our many brainstorms where we tried to name the game.
所以他们其实这全部都是他们想要叫这个游戏的名字。你可以看到这个游戏命名其实非常的困难。
Featuring such hits as Marvel Cosmic Posse, Marvel All Caps Orb. We briefly considered calling the game Infinity Stone, Heroes of Marvel, but we didn't do that. So normally I use a naming hack to name things. This is a frame from an XKCD comic where he talks about 2-syllable words where the emphasis is on the first syllable and how much fun these words are to say. Does anybody know what this poetic term is called? No, close. You got it. I don't know how to pronounce it. I asked, but I don't know how to pronounce it. So I think it's trochee is what I think it is. And they're just fantastic. Trochees are like the best word to type. Does anybody know the name of any famous companies? Just yell them out. Famous.
他的意思是说，就是他这边命名他也用了一个准则，就是2个音节的字，然后第一个音节是比较重的音节。
Well, not all at once. I can't hear you. I didn't ask for that. Okay, I'll just show you their answer here. So these are all trochees. Riot, Blizzard, Google, Facebook, Marvel, Netflix, Lego, Tesla, Meta, Intel, Apple, Call of Duty, YouTube. Every word up here is a trochee. And I also believe that what you name your game or company or whatever doesn't matter at all. So what's the thing?
所以他说你把你游戏叫什么名字其实不是很重要，可重要的是大家讲出来的那种感觉。所以就是像 Apple 其实跟他干的事情一点三小关系都没有。
Was it one of those, right? Some of you was one, some of the others. This one probably most of y'all thought about the one on the left here.
亚马逊
I never imagined deer constellations or space dollars when I saw this word. You can literally name stuff whatever you want, and people will fill that name in with new meaning, whatever you tell them it is. In fact, your game's name doesn't even need any real words in it. These are all nonsense words.
他说你的游戏根本就不需要任何真的意义在里面，因为大家都会之后把意义填到这个新的这个名字里面去，所以你可以看到这边都是一些莫名其妙的东西。那你现在这就是西洋棋，这是跳棋啊什么之类的，反正都是游戏的名字。
And nobody's like, I'm sorry, you say this game is called chess? What's a chess? So why Marvel Snap? Well, for years we struggled with the narrative wrapper for the game. Hearthstone has an evocative and grounded wrapper. It's the game that denizens of Azeroth play in a tavern. It's not so much a story, but a setting and a vibe. So what is Snap's setting? Does it have a story? And how do we tell it? Well, this is the thing I hate more than anything in video games. Welcome to Marvel Snap. The evil villain Thanos has assembled.
所以基本上就是漫威瞬战超能其实缺乏一个有意义的游戏叙事的背景这种感觉。那像在炉石的话，那炉石里面就是大家到旅店里面去打一场牌这个游戏叙事。可是在 Marvel Snap 里面并没有这个游戏叙事。不过一般来说，你需要自己设定一些莫名其妙的东西。那所以像这边就是说，萨诺斯干了一些坏事，然后所以就是大家就跑过来想要阻止他之类的。这边超过8个字，我不想读。
Here's some, I hate this so much. And to demonstrate the point, I've created the story tier list for you. So at S tier, we've got a story for the ages. At F tier, we've got a boring story. And here's the thing. At A tier, no story at all. It's just not that much worse than having a story for the ages. So if you are choosing between having a boring story or just cutting all the story out, cut the story out, please.
所以它这边就是游戏的 tier list。那S 级是超级强故事。那 F 级是一个无聊的故事 ，A 级是没有故事，所以你如果就是故事不够好的话，你就干脆连故事都没有之类的。
I consider vibes and setting to be really different than story. Some people say when I say story, they hear plot, and I think that's accurate. I don't have to understand Street Fighter's story to be able to enjoy it, and the game doesn't even try and explain it to me. They just say Blanca versus E Honda fight, and nobody.
所以像是那个街头拳王吗，还是什么之类，就是他也完全没有故事。可也没有问他们为什么要打架之类的。
I wanted to think about Marvel Snap. But despite that, we tried to ham-fist a story in anyway. So here's an actual presentation. I gave it to you here. The Infinity Stones have been destroyed. Their shards spread throughout the galaxy. Forces have moved to collect them. They cannot fall into the wrong hands. The stones must be reformed. But he can never know. Marvel Snap. So the plan was not to actually tell that story in that way in the game, but to use it as the setting for why you'd want to get cubes, we called them Infinity Stones at that time, and what your goal is in the game. So players would collect Infinity Shards, and as they got more and more of them, they'd assemble Infinity Stones, which unlock new features in the game. And we ended up pivoting away from these gameplay mechanics and the theming associated with them, as you'll see here.
所以基本上就是他们原先的游戏设定是这样，刚刚那个样子，就是萨诺斯干一些坏事，然后大家要去收集 无限宝石，收集宇宙魔方，然后他们就会变成无限宝石，然后会有游戏中另外一个机制之类的。不过后来他们已经改掉那个游戏机制了。不过基本上游戏的基本的那个 setting 还是在那边。
But we love the name so much that we decided to keep it. And to tie the name back in, we named our most iconic gameplay mechanic after the name.
Oh, snap.
So, thank you. Naming it a snap was a last-ditch effort to make our name make any kind of sense. Now that
所以他们把这个 snap 就是最后把这件事情命名成 snap， 所以因为他们原先就很喜欢那个名字之类的。
we stripped all the Infinity Stone stuff out of it. So why keep the name without the Infinity Stone theming? We could have changed the name to Marvel Cube or something. Well, we love the energy behind it. We love the snappiness of it. And games are over in a snap. It's a snap to learn. At the end of the day, I think the approachability and impact, inherent fun of the name makes an impact. Okay, so let's check in on our recipe, see how we're doing here. We've got the doubling cube from Backgammon and 5-minute mobile-friendly experience from Clash Royale. But the rest of the inspirations, once again, came from physical board and card games. Pause for impact. Okay. This is my dad, and when I was a kid, he used to give me his
我
own
天
business
爷
cards.
啊！所以这是 Ben Bro 的爸爸。我的天呐！那总而言之，就是剩下的游戏素材、游戏原料是从这个实体的这个桌游来的。
I would design card games on the back. So I got my first job at Blizzard. I kept all my old business cards, imagining that someday I would get to use them to make card games with. And this is the first physical prototype that we made on the development process for Marvel Snap on the back of my first business cards. So we had the doubling cube. We tried to keep it simple with only 2 numbers per card. We had some kind of weird leveling system. But the big thing that we were trying to achieve was simultaneous reveals. So this is my favorite 2-player board game, Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation by Reiner Knizia, who's the most prolific board game designer ever lived. He's got many hundreds of games to his credit. It's like Stratego, but when you fight an opponent's unit, you both play a card face down, and you reveal your cards at the same time, and it impacts the battle. I love the mind games in this game. It's incredible.
所以刚刚那个就是大家会一起开牌，然后会有一些揭示的事情发生，然后就影响了这个 Marvel Snap 的揭示这个机制之类的。
I also love this game, the Game of Thrones board game by Christian Peterson. It also has that same mechanic. When 2 armies fight, you play a card face down, you reveal them at the same time. Super fun. I found myself really drawn to this particular ingredient, and I wanted to experiment with it in card games.
所以就是这个翻牌的机制。
So I know this prototype has simultaneous reveals, but otherwise I cannot remember for the life of me how to play it because we only played it one time. And after we were done, me and Hamilton looked at each other and we said, "Yo, this game sucks," which was very demoralizing. When you're playing cards simultaneously, you need some kind of context. What do I think they're going to play? And then you could play around those suspicions. So we need something to start on the board to give you that context. And I should have known that we needed context because I used to participate in professional rock, paper, scissors competitions under a freeway overpass in
到底是好，反正总而言之就是他不知道为什么他以前有在LA 的桥下参加剪刀石头布的超级比赛之类的。说实在，我有国中的时候也干过，有差不多是，不过对，那他在讲说游戏需要一些 context， 就是需要知道一些前后文，然后你才有办法觉得那个游戏好玩之类。就像是 Marvel Snap， 其实需要知道对手到底出什么牌，然后你才能够好好的玩游戏，不然就是一头雾水，也不知道发生什么事。应该是类似这样。
So rock, paper, scissors is totally random, right? It's pretty
哦
boring.
天
There's
哪
very little strategy in rock, paper, scissors. The thing is, in these tournaments, you get 1 minute of taunting before the match begins. So most people come in character like the barber or
他说，像在玩剪刀石头布，或者是他之前在桥下玩剪刀石头布的时候，那在桥下玩剪刀石头布的前1分钟，你有1分钟的时间来做一些taunt， 来嘲讽对手，或者说跟对手交流，所以可以来影响对手说到底你会出剪刀石头还是布之类的。
sergeant scissors. But sometimes people just use a whole minute and go paper, 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 paper. And hilariously, that adds some context.
所以他说，有时候前1分钟你的对手可能就说不，然后就会让你觉得他到底是要出布还是要出剪刀，还是你就影响到你决定。
Are they telling the truth, or are they trying to double bluff me? So this game, Smash Up by Paul Peterson, doesn't have simultaneous reveals, but you can play your cards to locations, and the locations have special abilities that make each game a little different. And I thought this could be a really cool way to give the game we were working on some context for simultaneous reveals. And they did. So Mojo World, for example, is a location that gives you plus 100 power if you have more cards than your opponent. Okay, I bet they're going to play their cards to Mojo World. Or maybe I'll let them overcommit there, and I'll try and take the other 2 locations. And this core decision making was simple, but immediately fun. In our earliest prototypes, all the locations started revealed, but we felt like that was a lot of information to absorb right at the beginning of the game, so we made them reveal on turn 1, turn
所以这边就讲说，所以他们就把游戏加入了这个地点。你可以看到 这个其实是一个 Marvel Snap 的 prototype，你看它全部都是用纸做的，那这就是3个不同地点，中间这个地点就是魔之叫什么？反正就是要放比对手多一张牌的话，你在这边地点的战力就会增加。那原先一开始游戏是3个地点都全部直接揭露出来的，不过那对一个玩家来说，你可能第一轮就要花很多时间来读这3个不同地点，所以它就变成是每轮慢慢揭示的这个状况。
Turn 2 and turn 3 instead. So they give us the context we needed, but I think more importantly, they increased the variance of our core gameplay. So I said George Fan is the best GDC talk, but this talk by Richard Garfield titled Luck in Games is my all-time favorite design talk of any kind.
Oh my god！所以所以 Richard Garfield 如果大家不知道是谁的话，是做魔法风，就是一开始设计出魔法风云会的人。那他这边有做一个就是游戏中的运气成分的这个演讲之类的。那 Richard Garfield 其实他原先是一个数学博士生，我不知道他最后有没有把数学博士念完之类的，所以他其实是一个数学很强东东的人啊。给大家一些背景故事，那简单就是他那些3个地点其实也给游戏带来一些变化性。
So I think most people misunderstand the relationship between luck and skill. A lot of people imagine it as a scale, where you got luck on one side and skill on the other, and games are somewhere along this scale. And we use the terms luck-based and skill-based to talk about where games land on the scale.
所以这是你可以看到又是另外一个很有趣的图表，那就是他一般人会觉得运气跟技巧是就是游戏一定是运气居多或是技巧居多的游戏，没有运气多又技巧多这类的游戏之类的。
But that's not how it works at all. So you can have games that are low skill and high luck, like Chutes and Ladders, or high skill and low luck, like chess. But you can also have games, like my favorite game to make fun of, Tic-Tac-Toe, which is low skill and low luck. And you can have games that are high luck and high skill, like poker.
所以你可以看到，这就是又是一个又是一个图表，所以就是高运气成分这个游戏我其实从来没有玩过，这好像是一个小朋友游戏吧。然后是高技巧性的游戏，像是高技巧低运气成分，像是这个叫什么西洋棋。那像是这个圈圈叉叉低技巧低运气成分，所以大部分会平手。那还有这个高技巧高运气成分，像是扑克。
Like there's a ton of randomness in poker, but the best players are winning again and again. Games in the high luck, high skill category, I think are super fun because they include a ton of interesting decisions, but they also have exciting moments and are different every time you play them. So all card games have some amount of randomness because you shuffle a deck of cards and draw from a random deck. But Hearthstone, I think, has less variance at its core than other card games for a couple reasons. One, the mana system isn't random. You just get one every single turn of the game. Smaller decks decrease the variance some amounts. And because you aren't drawing resources, you're just drawing more usable cards every turn, so you effectively have a higher rate of card draw. Those all reduce the variance of Hearthstone's core gameplay rules.
所以它基本上就说炉石的这个基本炉石的这个运气成分其实没有那么多。
But the thing is, we wanted Hearthstone to have more variance.
所以他们之后就把炉石加了一大堆的这个 variance 要怎么翻变化性进来，或者说就是发现一张牌之类的。
So we added a bunch of variance to the cards. Arcane Missiles deals damage randomly. Lightning Storm deals a range of damage. Animal Companion summons a random.
所以他们这边就是你可以看到这3张远古卡片，其实就是各种莫名其妙的随机效果。
Beast. And this was successful at making Hearthstone more random, but players didn't love it. Right? We got a lot of feedback that Hearthstone felt too random. I think part of it is that the randomness here is very overt. Right? We had to put the word random on a lot of cards. But also, there's 2 different kinds of randomness.
所以他说，大家其实不是很喜欢那些随机性，那大家可能说觉得那些东西太随机了之类的，所以他这边又讲说，其实有2种不同随机性的。游戏设计是很有趣。
And then, like, draw your card. And then you have to make a strategic decision in the face of that random event. For example, the hub, it's a random card in each player's hand. And then you and your opponent have to figure out how to use that card to your best advantage after you've seen the random event. So input randomness is awesome. It puts you in new situations you've never been in before. You have to think on your feet and solve problems on the fly. In games without a lot of input randomness, there's like a right answer, right? Like in chess, players have to, for the really high levels, it's not like, okay, what piece do I move on turn 1? You've got like an opening move. People memorize a series of opening moves until you get to the fun part of chess later on.
所以他这边是说，这是一个 input randomness，就是直接输入式的、进入式的随机事件。所以就是比如说一个随机的事情发生，然后你就需要马上做出一个技巧性的决定，然后像是这个的 hub 这个地点就会把加一张随机的牌到双方手中，那你就要想办法，你到底有没有办法使用这张牌之类的。
Because the random event happens and then you get to respond to it, you feel like you have a lot of control over the randomness in the game. And output randomness is the opposite. So output randomness is where you make a decision and then you find out if it was the right decision or the wrong decision.
所以像是这个另外一种是你做了决定之后，然后随机事件才发生，像是这个危险，这叫什么危险房吗？反正这个地方有你放上去有25%的几率会摧毁你那张牌，所以像这个就是另外一种随机事件。
You have a 25% chance every time you play a card there for it to be destroyed. You have to decide to play a card there, and you're going to find out whether the right decision or the wrong decision. Ragnaros just it deals 8 damage to a random enemy. Maybe it's enemy hero, and you win.
所以如果有炉石的玩家的话，就知道这是研磨。随机你把它打下去之后，你才知道它到底会打到谁。
Maybe it's the exact minion you didn't want to hit, and you lose. But you have to choose to play Ragnaros first. So output randomness is exciting. It's what like streamers, like the viewers on Twitch love to see.
所以像这个输出式的这个输出式的随机性是很令人兴奋的事情，因为就基本上是完全在掷骰子。
It's great stories.
所以当你就比如说
this is, I think, the most exciting, like best question we can ask players in games, which is it worth the risk? And as a player deciding, okay, I think I'm going to lose this game. I need to start taking some risks. I'm going to start playing cards at Danger Room and hope I don't get the 25%. I think that's really interesting depth, and that's the kind of depth you get from output randomness.
Play the opposite. 这是其实一个很有趣的，我自己也在学这种东西。其实一般来说，大家会觉得这种东西都极渣，至少我觉得这种东西极渣。不过其实也是，就等于说你要做一些最后一指的 gambit， 最后一指的赌注，所以这就会造成一个有点像是你在游戏里面写一个故事，然后你最后真的没有办法，你就必须要把一张大牌打在这个25%会被摧毁的地方，这种感觉。
Having seeing that a random event's coming and controlling the odds, for example, destroying all the other minions, so Ragnaros is definitely going to hit the ones you want, is also some fun depth that comes from output randomness. And this is interesting. If you have output randomness, players will say that they lost to the randomness, which has pros and cons. The cons are that it feels like you don't have very much agency and you just kind of lost randomly and your skill doesn't matter. But the pro is that as people, we are unable to grapple with our own ineptitude, and this provides an outlet for your ego.
所以他这边就是说，就是大家会说，哦，我输给这个随机机制了。那他说。这有些好处，有些坏处。那有些是有些，比如说自己的那个自尊很强的人嘛 ，ego 很强的人，那他就会说，哦，就会把自己的东西都全部挂在这个游戏机制上面。那基本上也给那些人一个就是可以怪罪的东西。然后另外一个就是，当然有可能你真的就输给随机机制啊，那也是没有办法的事情。
So locations. I think interestingly are both input randomness and output randomness. And you get to choose which of those you want more of. So if you play to a revealed location, that's input randomness. You got to see what the location was going to be, and then you decide to play a card there or not. And
所以这边就讲地点，地点既可以是输入的这个随机性，有可能输出的随机性，因为你可以选择它揭示之后，你再打一张牌进去。
That's output randomness, right? You play a card to an unrevealed location.
如果它还没揭示，你就把牌打进去的话，那就等于是一个。输出式的东西，因为你牌已经进去，然后才知道那个地点是好还是不好。
Surprise! It's a murder world. Your cards are dead. Mistake. So we've talked about a couple of the impacts of locations, the randomness, the add, simultaneous reveals. But they also have a couple other interesting effects. So in a collectible card game, over time, the meta gets stale. This is why other card games release thousands of new cards a year, hundreds of new cards a year, to keep the meta fresh. It's because eventually you run out of new problems to solve, right? I've seen this deck before. I know what it's trying to do. Locations give you every single game something new, something exciting is going to happen, so it reduces the effect of a stale meta some amount. And by the same token, it lowers the impact of imbalance, right? Everyone's playing the same deck as one deck is broken. At least the locations are giving you new problems to solve, even if enemy players are not. Balance is still.
所以基本上这个地点其实也解决非常多问题，也会让你的等于说 meta 就算已经被解决完，你还是要解决这个地点的问题。就是游戏的牌组，你牌组里面12张牌已经被解决，然后对手的12张牌的问题已经被解决，就是你知道他是什么牌组，你也知道你是什么牌组，你知道 meta 长什么样子，那你还是要解决这个地点问题。那接下来就是
important, but lowers the impact of some amount.
就是游戏的平衡性，有时候也可以获得这些地点获得解决，我的感觉就。
It makes live ops. I mean, still not working for live ops, but it adds a cool lever for us, right? We can add new locations or change the locations to create live ops pretty easily. For example, we have this thing called hot location, where one day a week, this location shows up in 50% of all games. It causes players to change their decks to take advantage of the location. It adds some fun live ops flavor to the game. Unless we make the hot location make the current best deck even better, and then it increases the staleness of the genre, like we did when Mr. Negative was the best deck, and we made the peak the featured location. Huge mistake. So we had 100 locations going into launch. And late in the game, we decided, hey, wait a second, what if we cut 60 locations and instead launch with 40 locations, and then we can launch one new location every single week for a year? And 40 was not the right number, but we did cut most of the locations and kept releasing one every week for a year. It was a great way to front load our launch.
哦，所以他们基本上原先有更多地点，所以你可以看到他们现在等于说原先可能我不知道，他说他这边举的例子说他们原先有100个地点，然后他们就比如说先试出60个地点，然后剩下40个地点就每周放出一个地点，所以这样他们就一直有新地点进来这个游戏里面，
with tons of live ops content. Okay, so we had the doubling,
所以就会一直影响游戏。
the reveals, we had locations, we started having a ton of fun, and all, this prototype, starting from that first prototype, this one took about 2 days, which is not very normal, and we doubted ourselves a lot. We took a break from this and started trying to design some other games because we weren't sure this was it. But we just keep wanting to come back and play this one. We eventually printed out the prototype instead of writing it on some cards because we were fighting over the only copy of Galactus. And we used the prototype.
所以他说他们原先其实在想办法做新游戏的时候，第2天就做出了这个 Marvel Snap 的游戏，然后之后他们就把那些牌也真的印出来了，然后那个可是因为他们只印了1张吞星，所以他们2个就都想要那张牌。OK， 所以他们还用这个想办法用这个方法来打2v2，所以你可以看到这个2v2是有可能会发生的，在 Marvel Snap 里面。
Years later to prototype 2v2, so 2v2 is just 5 locations, and your team has to win 3 out of 5 of the locations.
哦，所以他这边有讲2v2是5个地点，然后你的队伍必须要赢5个地点里面3个地点，很有意思。我操！等一下我脑袋快爆炸，什么
？The physical prototype because it's hard to prototype. Now, I'm not saying we're going to do 2v2. It's something we're experimenting with, but
他说他们不一定会做2v2，只是他们在实验。OK，
it was fun to try. Okay, so here's the full recipe for Marvel Snap. We had the doubling cube for backgammon, simultaneous reveals and mind games from Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, locations with abilities from Smash Up, 5-minute games for Clash Royale, and a few, I think, really impactful innovations: 6-turn games, 12-card decks, and I think for the first time, maybe in a collectible card game, only 1 card type, which means there's like no card types, right? It's not even a thing. So these innovations were impactful, but it's not clear to me that your game needs any innovations to feel fresh and exciting and unique. For example, I think if you asked players of Marvel Snap, what are the top 3 fresh things in Marvel Snap, I think none of the innovations would be on that list. So with the basic core gameplay figured out, it was time to move to our digital prototype. And here's the first digital prototype. We were prioritizing moving fast, so I think it took about 2 weeks to make. I don't know how to do any networking stuff, so it was a hot seat prototype where both people play on the same screen. We played a bunch on the iPad. This is a big iPad, but it looks bigger. That's my son's 4-year-old hand there, so it scales off. So we tried to make
所以他们就马上就是直接进入就是数位的 prototype。
this stuff super easy to change, so we could essentially figure out all of the right number for all of the levers in the game by brute force. So we tried 6-turn games, 5-turn games. We tried skipping turn 1, doing turns 2 through 6. We tried 3, 4, 5 cards in the starting hand. We tried 9 cards per location, 6 cards, 3 cards, 4 cards per location. We tried it all. So everything up to this point.
所以他们基本上就是就是有几个回合，然后一开始起手几张牌，他们都直接就是直接用暴力测试的方法去测试到底怎么样才对了。还有一个地点有几张牌也是。
Was done while the studio was just 2 people in Hamilton. Not that we had that much stuff. We scribbled on some cards and spent a couple weeks on a prototype. But I think having the smallest team possible really allows for a dramatic pivot. Because you spend less time explaining the vision and getting buy-in from a large team. So in my first year on Hearthstone, the team is about 10 people.
所以他这边讲说，因为他们一开始团队只有他跟那个 CEO Hamilton， 所以他们2个人其实就直接可以搞定一切事情，然后你想要做什么大转换也比较快。那他说他在设计炉石的时候，一开始有10个人呢，想必你就要说服这个10个人中每个人，那就会比较困难一点。
And Blizzard came into a meeting one day and said, hey, we're going to take all of the engineers and we're going to move them on to help ship StarCraft 2. We're going to leave about 3 people left on the team. And we were pretty sure the game was canceled. We just thought, oh, that's got to be it. They're never coming back. The people left on the team were Ben Thompson, the art director, and Eric Dodds and I. And Eric Dodds was the first lead designer. At the time this happened, there was a ton of momentum in another direction. We were working really hard on basically some other project. And when this happened, it allowed us to be really flexible.
所以他说，原先设计炉石有10个人，然后那个暴雪跑过来说，我们需要这里的所有工程师，然后把所有工程师拔走去搞星海2，那反而让他们的团队变小很多，然后反而他们有小团队之后，他们就可以开始来做炉石，因为他们原先其实在做其他的，几乎是另外一个游戏的东西。
And experiment quickly and try crazy stuff. And the rest of the team wasn't totally gone. They were around for playtests and some conversations and stuff. But essentially, at the end of the year where those team members came back, we had the totality of Hearthstone's core gameplay figured out and prototyped. Once a team gets really big, turning the ship becomes way harder. So late in the game on Marvel Snap, we had a really big pivot where we changed all of the theming and got rid of some currencies. And the team, up to this point, had been giving feedback that they were worried that we hadn't really locked down some of our meta progression stuff just yet. There was a lot of change. And so I knew that this pitch to change stuff was not going to go down easy necessarily. And so I met with everyone on the team individually to walk them through the pitch, give them the opportunity to ask questions, make sure that they felt heard. And it takes weeks to manage this kind of change management. And
所以他这边有说他们在最后周似乎还有做一些其他的蛮大的改动，所以就是主要是游戏里面货币的改动。那他这时候做这么大改动，其实他本身就有，这其实都是游戏设计的另一个层面，就是对人的部分。然后他刚对游戏部分其实应该已经讲完，那他是说，当你团队变大的时候，你其实就要这个很照顾游戏的团队的每个人，所以他其实对每个团队每个人都有解释说为什么游戏要这样改，然后就是1对1解释。然后如果说他们有什么问题的话，他也会回答他们之类的。
Even the idea of having to do this adds a huge amount of friction to deciding to make a pivot. I think the worst thing you can do early on is not pivot when you should, because you miss the opportunity to maybe do something great. So eventually we did end up adding some more folks, and here's our first 2-device build that our chief production officer, Young Woo, got working. Apparently he was a secret back-end server engineer, which was a delightful surprise. You can see we started with 9 cards per location here. We were experimenting with 5 turns. We tried some wild stuff like a left versus right.
好天啊！所以你可以看到，这他们试过各种不同的东西。
Get that like face-off battle feeling going. Our art director, Jamaro Kindred, began to pretty up the game a bit. We felt like we were cruising forward on our prototype, but we ran into a snag. I think every other card game has had cards that say stuff like destroy target creature, things like that. We had a bunch of cards like that. In Hearthstone, I think we had a great UI for this. You drag a card out, an arrow attaches to your cursor, and wherever you move your cursor, the arrows, so you know you're in targeting mode when you drag a card out that requires a target. And to cancel the battle cry, you tap on the card or just tap on any card in your hand. But on mobile, once you drag a card out, we have nothing to attach a cursor to. So you just don't know that you're in targeting mode. People kept tapping back on their hand to play another card and canceling the battle cry. It didn't work very well. It was fundamentally broken on mobile. So we had to build a whole new UI. The screen darkens and desaturates to let you know you're in a new mode.
所以他这边又在讲说，就是当你要指定摧毁一个东西的时候，像这个炉石里面，就是打出这张牌之后，他这边会跳出你所有可以指定的目标，然后你再就是选一个目标。
Potential targets are lit up in color that float above the board, and you can tap on the target you want. So I think this flow is just much worse than the PC flow. But it's not like we can just remove targeting for the mobile version of Hearthstone. So when we started to run into these issues in Snap, we said, hey, what if we just get rid of targeting altogether? In reality, every Marvel Snap card requires a target. You have to target the left, middle, or right location. So essentially, we're asking players to choose 2 targets when cards require a target. And we realized that we could apply the second target from the first target. So here's Electra. She used to target any one cost card. We changed.
所以这边他就讲说，那为了解决这个目标性的问题，所以他们这是艾丽卡，那原先是摧毁一个遗废卡，那现在就变成是摧毁对手这个区域的遗废卡，所以等于说，因为原先你还要做选区域的动作，不过这边就是你现在选了区域之后，等于说你也可以知道你大概会摧毁什么东西之类的。
Start a target a random one cost card at her location. The UI is much simpler, and usually there's only one cost card at her location anyway.
这边其实是解决很多游戏 UI 的问题。
Applying a target through card ordering. So here Mystique used to be able to choose a target to become a copy of, but in her next iteration, her target is applied by playing her after you play.
所以这是模型女。那原先是你可以选择复制任何一张卡，那现在是变成复制一张，就复制上一张你玩的卡，所以你这样就不会有这种选择性的问题。
The card you want to copy. We didn't have that many cards that required targets. It was like 10 or something. But we changed them all, and the game felt much better. And with that solved, we continued to make progress in the game, and the prototype morphed slowly into a real build. And eventually, I think it looks great. Okay, so earlier in the talk, I bragged about how it took us 2 days to design the core gameplay for Marvel Snap. But as it turned out, we would be paid back for that good fortune with 4 years of struggle trying to come up with a core loop and satisfying progression model for the game. So here's a diagram of our core loop. Please. This is one of the many iterations we were working through. It was madness. We had leagues where you have to do better to get up to the next league, and that's where certain cards were league restricted. We had
所以像刚刚那个就是有各种联盟，然后每个联盟的卡会不一样之类的，是那其实是叫什么皇室战争的模组。
Hero collector that worked like World of Warcraft garrisons, where you'd send heroes off on missions to bring back cards for you. This is a sphere grid with every card in the game on it, and you have to decide which cards you want to make progress towards. So the big lesson we learned from all that was we needed to simplify. So we went from this to this, We cut a ton of stuff, and we saw this, and we're like, yes, we did it. We got there. And we went into our next testing phase. And unfortunately, it was still wildly overcomplicated. We had these leagues, but we pasted over the problems we were having with these bizarre theming changes with infinity stones. We had a buy-in. You got to choose the states of the game before you went in. We had this weekly rank. Here's a shop where you can just buy the cards you wanted directly, and they rotate it every day, which means after not that long, the only cards remaining are the cards you definitely don't want to buy. It didn't work at all. And so we went from this in 2020 to this. And this is what we shipped with. And I always feel pretty dumb when I spend so much time like analyzing a design problem, and I'm like, aha, the answer is to add more complexity, only to realize that the answer was to simplify, remove complexity.
所以基本上它就是把游戏变简单很多。
But this quote from Pascal makes me feel better. I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time.
所以这是 Pascal， 这是应该是一个科学家，就是你的那个，好，总而言之，大家怕只是一个气压的装备。那他说我可以写一个更短的信，不过我没有那样的时间，因为写一个更短信更难之类的。
So speaking of time, I'm almost out of it, but I wanted to wrap this up by boiling it down to 4 takeaways. But before I do, I just want to say one last thing. The design of the core gameplay of Snap was, I think, foundationally important to the whole experience, but it's only like 1% of the total amount of work to make the game great. What's much more important is all of the decisions we made as a team that add up over 4 years of game development. So we're basically a fully remote studio at this point, so I don't have a lot of great pictures of the whole team, but I wanted to say the team at Second Dinner is bonkers, and I'm super lucky to be a part of it. Okay, so here's my 4 takeaways. Chefs need ingredients, so stock your pantry. Be the speedboat until your direction is clear. Embrace randomness, input or output. And simplify, even if your team hates you.
所以基本上他想要大家学到的东西就是这个游戏设计是用材料的，然后做决定要快很准，基本上，然后有些随机性其实不要太害怕，要拥抱那些随机性，然后最后就是要简化。他花4年在做简化，哇哦。
All right, that's all I got. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, everybody.
OK， 那剩下应该全部都是问答，15分钟问答我们就不看了。那这个影片也搞1个小时，我已经加速了播，你可以看到，因为我还要翻译，所以就对我其实也很想看这个 talk 啦，所以就跟大家一起看。我其实不知道这样会不会有版权问题，不过我不管它。感谢大家今天收看，如果喜欢，记得按赞、订阅还有留言，我们就之后再见了，拜拜。